Indian historians, I won't call them historians because they don't go deep into Tibetan history. It was 1959, October 5, when China invaded Tibet from the east, and then we were forced to sign this 17-point agreement in May 23, 1951. The only way to handle China or bring China on its knees is give them less business.
So many Indians
Yes.
who do not want to buy Chinese goods, there are so many Indians who are saying we're willing to pay a premium. If India does not make it, America does, or Europe does, we're willing to pay a premium. But he said, we never even come to know. And this is, my small little war that I have been fighting.
What Pakistani people need is more job, more employment, more economic development, not nuclear missiles to kill other people.
Doesn't it make more sense for you to be somewhere in Malcha Marg or Chanakya?
I keep telling the Europeans, the more you kowtow to the Chinese, the more they will ride you. Some of the friends tell me, oh, the dragon is biting at us, meaning China. Then I tell them, who fed the dragon to become so strong to be able to bite at you?
In a sense, the more you feed the dragon, the more the dragon will bite you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to GAP, the Gaurav Arya podcast. We've had a series of guests. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for your support. Today we have a special guest. A very, very important guest. Important for India. Important for the rest of the world. It is my honor and privilege to welcome on our show, Sikyong Penpa Tsering. Tashid Alexa.
Tashdile.
Thank you very much for gracing our show, sir. And it's a matter of great honor and privilege that you are here. Ladies and gentlemen, Sikyong is a title which means political leader, loosely translated as president, as prime minister. Essentially, the key word here is Sikyong, which is political leader. Of course, Sikyong Penpa Tsering is part of the Central Tibetan Administration. And he's here on our show, on the Gaurav Arya podcast. Sir, my question to you is, Tibetans have really suffered under Chinese rule, sir. And it's not new. It's been going on even before His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to India. It's been happening from before. A lot of people say that there has been deliberate demographic change by the Chinese. They have put Han Chinese there. How much of this is true, sir? We have read articles, but I've never heard it from a bona fide source. So I would like to talk to you about this.
It's very difficult to give an exact number of how many Chinese have already moved to Tibet, because there are Chinese business people who move into towns and cities where they can make money, but they don't go to villages. Then you also have a lot of floating populations in the form of military, in the form of migrant laborers who come from China, just like, now that China is considered as the factory of the world, when they can go as far as Latin America and Africa for resources, and why not occupy Tibet? So you also have a lot of people who work in the mining areas which are not accounted for, because China has a very strange hukou system, what they call it, the household listing. If you don't stay in one place for more than 6 months, you are not listed as a householder in that area. So that part is also there. But if you look from eastern Tibet, particularly from Amdo, let us say, then the city called Siling itself is about 2.2 million people. And out of that, only about less than 100,000 are Tibetans. So which means Chinese are majority in that particular city, coming from eastern Tibet. So overall, one could say today in Tibet, over the last 40-50 years, the number has increased. We have always been saying 6 million Tibetans, not increased by 1 or decreased by 1. But according to the latest Chinese census of 2020, it looks more likely that the Tibetan number has, over the years, over the decades, increased to 7.3 million. And if you count all the Chinese in major Tibetan cities and townships, then it could exceed the number of Tibetans in Tibet.
The Tibetan diaspora is spread all over the world, sir.
Yes.
And we see that whenever there is the Chinese premier or the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, or even before him, so there are regular protests, and the world takes notice, because Tibet is something that is very close to the heart of a lot of people. Now, for a person who has had Tibetan friends, And I'm not saying that I understand the issue completely, but yes, I have a little bit of an understanding of the issue, if not more. I understand that it is occupied land. When was Tibet actually occupied by the Chinese? Because the Tibetans had their own kings and they had their own kingdom, the kingdom of Tibet. It was there. When was it occupied by the Chinese kingdoms earlier? So when was that?
Now maybe we should do a short overview of the history of Tibet. Tibet has a well-accepted history of more than 2,200, 2,300 years. And before that, of course, the Shangshung dynasty and all that. So it goes back many thousands of years. But there are also stories that the first king of Tibet came from India, Prince Rupati. So the India-Tibet relation is very, very old. And then there was also a sacred text, a Buddhist text in the hand of a Tibetan king in 3rd century. That was the first Buddhist text into Tibet. And then 7th century, the Tibetan emperor sent a minister to invent a Tibetan script. So the Tibetan script also comes from India. It's based on Brahmi and Gupta script. Because some people ask us, since now that Tibet is occupied by China, whether Tibetan language has anything to do with Chinese language, which is not. The script came from India. Even now, if I say Kaka Kanga, Cha Cha Chanya, Tata Thana, it's very similar to Hindi consonants.
Yes.
And we have only 4 vowels, E, U, A, O, whereas you have A, E, E, U, A, O, Aha, so many vowels. So the language also comes from India. And then between 7th to 9th century, Tibet was a huge empire. We even dislodged the Chinese emperor and put a puppet king there in the Chinese capital of Xiangyang those days, or Xiang. And the Tibetan empire also extended up to present-day Samarkand in Uzbekistan. So that used to be the extent of Tibetan empire between 7th to 9th century. Then Tibet disintegrated for about 400 years. Then Genghis Khan became a big power in Central Asia. And we built relations with the 5th Khan, Kublai Khan, and his father, with the Sakyapas. So we built relations with the Mongols around 1247 with Kublai Khan's father, and later Sajja Pandita's nephew worked with Kublai Khan. Then we developed this priest-patron relationship. So the Mongols invaded China in 1271. And then it became the Yuan dynasty. So Mongols were there even before Yuan dynasty and after Yuan dynasty. But for the Chinese historians, from 1271 to 1368 was the period when Mongols ruled China. It's not the Chinese who ruled China, but the Mongols ruled China from China. And then Tibet was ruled by the Sakyapas during that period. And then following the Mongol invasion of China, the Mongols were dislodged by the Mings, who are the real Chinese, Han Chinese, because you're talking about 56 nationalities within China. And Han Chinese are the majority. Of course, there are a lot of intellectual discourses as to who's the real Chinese. Mongols Chinese, Manchus Chinese, Tibetans Chinese. If Mongols are Chinese, then China can claim half of the world because Genghis Khan conquered that much area. So the Mings ruled China from 1368 to 1644, whereas Tibet, in comparative history, was ruled by 3 dynasties. The Pomodrupa dynasty for about 100 years, Rinpoche for about 100 years, and Depa Tsangpa for about 100 years, from 1368 to 1642. Then the 5th Dalai Lama took over the spiritual and temporal leadership in 1642, 2 years before the Manchus or the Qings dislodged the Mings in China. So you can see a difference of 2 years where the 5th Dalai Lama. So since then, from 1642 to till now, the successive Dalai Lamas have been ruling Tibet, and then China was ruled by the Manchus, who are not Chinese. The societal perspective of the Chinese people is that Manchus are not Chinese. They are invaders. They are barbarians. So you build those a Great Wall to keep the barbarians away. So today, the Great Wall is the backbone, not the boundary of China, with what they call as the barbarians for Mongols, Manchus, Tibetans, and all that. So around 1720, after the 5th Dalai Lama, the 6th Dalai Lama came, and then the Manchus came into Tibet, essentially to support the Tibetans against the Gurkha invasion, Nepalese invasion of Tibet. But they didn't have to fight a war. They went back without having to fight a war. Again, they came back in 1790s, late 18th century, and then they claimed that they invented this golden urn for the selection of Dalai Lama and all that. So those were Manchu influences in Tibet. But Tibet was never directly ruled by the Chinese, till the end of the Manchu Empire. And in between, you had the Young Husband expedition of Tibet in 1904, when Young Husband came up to Lhasa in 1904. But where were the Chinese then? And Indian historians, I won't call them historians because they don't go deep into Tibetan history, but at least those who study about Tibet, they like to say Tibet became independent since 1913. Because we kicked out every single Chinese from Tibet in 1912. So that is why you still see some Chinese in Kolkata, because we didn't send them directly through Tibet, but send them through India so that they don't come back with reinforcement. But by that time, the nationalists had taken over and they were not very much in a position to...
This is a very interesting piece of history, sir. They went to Calcutta.
They were sent through Calcutta back to China. So many of them stayed back in Kalimpong, Darjeeling area.
Okay.
But after 1962 war, they were also removed from those places, and some of them still stay in Kolkata. That is why you still have... Not all the Chinese in Kolkata were from Tibet, because the 13th Dalai Lama went to, after the Young Husband expedition, had to leave to Mongolia and then again to China from 1904 to 1909. And then the 13th Dalai Lama came back to Tibet. Took about a year for him to come because he also preaches on the way. And 3 months after he was in Lhasa, the Chinese came from Kham area. They killed so many Khampas in 1910. And it took 2 years for the Tibetans to kick out every Chinese. And then the 13th Dalai Lama reiterated the independence of Tibet, not announced like it's a new country. It was there. So then Mongolia and Tibet also signed an agreement. And then there was the Shimla Agreement of 1914, where McMahon Line was devised between British India and independent Tibet. So even today, we are committed to the Shimla Agreement and the McMahon Line because we were signatories to that. Chinese were part of it, but they did not ratify it eventually. So all those historical relations were there. And Tibet remained an independent state till Chinese occupation in 1950, when China forcefully occupied Chamdo in eastern Tibet. And that was the attack of the eastern garrison. And then we were forced to sign this so-called 17-point agreement in 1951. That is why even now I keep telling the international community, we have only one agreement, or with the Communist Chinese, that is the 17-point agreement. And then they themselves trampled on every provision of that agreement, all the 17 points. We tried to live under that agreement for 8 years, from 1951 to 1959, before His Holiness came into exile. So since China trampled on all the provisions, then we had to also abrogate that agreement. So it was 1959, October 5, when China invaded Tibet from the east, and then we were forced to sign this 17-point agreement in May 23, 1951.
So there was a significant time, sir, more than thousands of years, when Tibet was absolutely, it had its own identity.
Yes.
It had its own politics, its own religion, its own culture, its own script, its own language, its own food.
Yes.
Nothing to do with China. Rather,
Nothing
Tibetans had at one point in time conquered China, sat in their capital, and like you mentioned, sir.
There was also this story about when we developed relations with Mongols. Mongols were merciless. They Genghis Khan, if he had to invade Delhi, he comes from Panipat and he kills everybody in Panipat. By the time he reaches Delhi, everybody surrenders because he's merciless.
Yes.
And they were killing a lot of Chinese. They were throwing Chinese into the sea. And the Tibetan masters told them not to kill the Chinese. Actually, Tibetans saved Chinese life during the Mongol times in the initial stage. But we have to suffer this fate, not having done anything against the Chinese. But now we are suffering under the Chinese.
My question is, sir, that, this is about the history and how His Holiness came to India in exile. What is the way forward? I mean, from the global community, because everybody makes the right noises.
Yes.
Everybody says the right thing. Apart from China, nobody, to my mind, will say that, no, the Tibet cause is not a good cause and we don't. Everybody supports it, whatever I've seen a little bit. There could be one or two odd people, but otherwise, all nations generally have a very soft corner. They love Tibet, they want to support Tibet. But what is the way forward, sir? Do you think there is a way forward? Do you think that Tibet will be free? Because we would love to see a free Tibet, but
Yes.
what can India do? What can the world do? Because China is not going to just simply leave one day, so they're not going to do that.
Now, free Tibet and independent Tibet are two different things, because independent, then you are talking about an independent nation. Free also includes freedom without the nation being sovereign in that sense. So one of the biggest concern for the Chinese government has always been sovereignty. When they can want to expand the whole of South China Sea, then why not occupy Tibet? So sovereignty has always been a major issue with the Chinese. And since the occupation of Tibet by China, there have been a lot of problems for the Tibetans, whether it's in terms of freedom of religious practice or the 10 long years of Cultural Revolution where they destroyed everything old from 1966 to 76. So there have been the whole issue was whether we will be able to preserve the identity of the Tibetans. If the identity of the Tibetans are not there, it doesn't make sense to have a country or a people without those values. So we are talking about the global significance of Tibet, not just from the historical perspective, but also the geostrategic importance of Tibet. Tibet being located in the center of Asia, bordering so many countries, Tibet being an unexploited land, with a lot of resources because it's huge, 2.37 million square kilometers. Some say 2.5 million square kilometers, which is about a quarter of China. And then you also talk about Tibet's importance from an ecological or environmental point of view, because Tibet is now called as the third pole, roof of the world, water tower of Asia. It extends much beyond Tibet, in the whole region. The even Indian monsoon is decided by the jet streams that flow over the Tibetan plateau and the warming up of the Pacific in the form of El Nino. All these contribute towards, which are going to be the depression areas in India, which are going to be the hot places in India. Wherever there's depression, the clouds come in and then you have more rainfall. So all these have a lot of implications because of the Tibetan plateau, the high Tibetan plateau. So those are also there. And then we have always considered ourselves as a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. We transliterated every available Sanskrit and Pali texts, Buddhist texts, into Tibetan from 8th to 13th century, before Buddhism almost vanished out of India. And today we are very proud to say that Tibetan language is the only language from which you can learn Buddhism in its true essence. Right now we are in the process of transliterating it back into Sanskrit, the original text. So the languages are very similar. And so we are very proud to say that we are a repository of one part of ancient wisdom, which is manifested in the messages of His Holiness the Dalai Lama through peace and compassion, all those values which human beings need. And particularly at this point of time, as we speak, of course, we hear more about Israel, Gaza, now Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran, all that, and then Ukraine, Russia. Well, but there are some 55 conflicts going on, violent conflicts going on around this world as we speak. So the message of peace and non-violence is very important. What's happening in Gaza? Are we really resolving the present crisis, or are we creating more problems for future? Because all the young kids are going to witness all the destruction that's happening with properties and lives. So we have always believed that if there has to be a lasting solution to any conflict, then it can only be through non-violence. Violence will beget more violence, as Mahatma Gandhi ji also said that an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. So this is never a solution. Then when there's too much violence, then people are driven by emotions, not by logic, not by reason. And this escalates into more violence. what's happening in Middle East is very, very sad. So that is why the understanding of ancient Indian wisdom in the form of understanding the concept of oneness of humanity, whether we are black or white or yellow or whatever, we are all human beings. All 8 billion people are human beings in this with the same intellect. So if we can think on those concepts and also think about the interdependent nature of our existence, we are all social animals. Humans cannot survive singularly or individually. We have to depend on a community, and the larger community is the global stage. So if we understand these concepts, that something that happens in one part of the world has its impact on the other part of the world, then we will be more responsible people, including leaders like Putin or Xi or whoever it is. If they can think on those lines, then this world will naturally be a more peaceful world. Otherwise, it's going to lead to a lot of catastrophic consequences if what is happening is true. Just this morning, I was reading about United States going to rework on its nuclear programs because there's too much threat from Russia and China, or North Korea for that matter. So all this dynamism in global politics is also not taking the world in the right direction or the positive direction. So my recommendation is for the Europeans also. I keep telling them, okay, you support Ukraine with armaments and all that. That's good, because Ukrainian people are also very brave to be able to, resist and defend their country. It is very important. Otherwise, it will have consequences elsewhere in the world about China's ambitions in Taiwan, or maybe Russia's ambition elsewhere also. But if we think from a non-violent perspective, the only way to handle China or bring China on its knees is give them less business. So you talk about 27 EU countries, they import 600 billion US dollars worth of goods and services from China and export only 200 billion. So you're talking about a 400 billion trade imbalance every single year. Even in India, despite all the rhetoric and belligerence on the border, trade is going up, which is not good.
$125 billion per year, sir.
Yes. And India's the foreign exchange reserve is going up a little bit as of yesterday. So, but then trade imbalance with China is increasing all the time.
That's right.
And right now, China needs all that money. There were a year or 1.5 years ago, China was talking about $3.6 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserve, which they splurge on Belt and Road Initiative, on space technology, on military technology, and high-end equipment, maybe even microchips, because now they are getting strangled by tariffs from the United States. So they are doing things which the free world does not want them to do. And all these are be augmented by the business surplus they have. So now there are serious issues about overcapacity. Tariffs from US government, Canadian government, 100% on Chinese EV cars. And just yesterday, the European Union also decided to impose this tariff of 17 to 34%, 35% over and above the 10% that they levy on imports. So those things are happening, and China's now pivot is more towards the global south. The question is, how much purchasing power does the global south have? It's mostly the Europeans, because they want both their hegemonistic ambitions in the region and fuel defense expenditure by all the countries around China. At the same time, they want European market and American market, because it's not possible to get both. And I think the Europeans are also waking up to that. America has learned it the hard way since 2000, when Clinton decided to, or at the beginning of Bush Jr.'s tenure, to include China in the World Trade Organization, free trade agreement with United States, and then also China getting the opportunity to host what they call as the coming out party, the Olympics. And that also resulted in the U.S. Tibet policy of 2002. The U.S. is the only country that has a law on Tibet. So U.S. has learned the hard way. We all hope that if we make China part of the global community, they'll become more responsible. But unfortunately, today, China has gone in a direction where when the whole world is moving towards multiculturalism, China is the only one that's moving towards uniculturalism. So, and become more irresponsible. We're talking about multipolar world, bipolar world. So it's still shaping up. It's still very fluid, very dynamic. Whether it will be multipolar or whether it's going to be bipolar, whether we agree or not, it's definitely a war between democracy and authoritarianism. So China being the biggest bully, try to get all other smaller bullies with them. So now you have new abbreviations like CRINC, C for China, R for Russia, I for Iran, NK for North Korea. So those kind of things are also evolving. Then now you have a lot of multilateral forums also coming up, like Quad, AUKUS, because of China's behavior in the region. So yeah, there are a lot of things happening right now. It's pretty interesting.
No, absolutely. One thing, sir, which I've always been advocating, hitting China economically.
Yes.
So we shop on Amazon and we shop on Flipkart, and there is billions of dollars worth of business every year. All we need to do is on the photograph of that. Let's say I'm buying, for example, a watch.
Yes.
On Amazon or on Flipkart or any other platforms for that matter. Online, it should show the Chinese flag. Let me be informed.
Country of origin.
Country of origin, sir.
Yeah.
Any country, it could be the US, China.
Yeah.
There are so many Indians who do not want to buy Chinese goods. There are so many Indians who are saying, we're willing to pay a premium. If India does not make it, America does, or Europe does, we're willing to pay a premium. But he said, we never even come to know. And this is, my small little war that I have been fighting, that at least put the flag of the country of origin so I can make an informed choice. And then if an Indian wants to buy Chinese goods, because, so you know what happened in Galwan, right? You know what happened in 62, in 67, Nathula.
Yeah.
And the more we do business with China, the more we fund the Chinese army, the more we fund the PLA, because where is that money going? And we don't even know which companies we're doing business with. I did a detailed research, and it seems that many of the bigger companies, especially in telecom and electronics, are actually owned by the PLA. Sir. There are so many companies that are owned by the PLA. There is shareholding of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. So it's obviously a threat as far as India is concerned. Now, I had asked this question, around 10 minutes before we were having this, that what can the world do? It's time to pressurize China. China is not going to give you even, let's say, so we say free Tibet. What does it mean? Basic modicum of human rights and freedom for the Tibetan people, the preservation of their culture, their values, their heritage, their religion. Is that it? Or we are also talking about sovereignty. Sovereignty is Chinese get out, Tibet to be ruled by Tibetans only, and when the Chinese come, they need a visa. If at all, it is permitted by the Tibetan government. So what are we talking about here, sir?
We officially, the stated position of the Central Tibetan administration is the middle way policy. It's a Buddhist concept drawn into political connotations. When we say middle way policy, then you also have to understand that there are polarities or extremities. Otherwise, there is no middle way. The idea behind is that, of course, when His Holiness started thinking about the middle way, that was in the beginning of 70s. You can imagine what was going on inside Tibet with Cultural Revolution, where everything being destroyed. The concern was, how do we preserve our identity and our people? So with that, and taking the reality into situation, even countries like India, who has been Tibet's neighbor for millennia, from the beginning of this creation of this world, whenever civilization started, people started existing. We were there. But Indian government has its own position, its own interests. And I've always been saying, if there has to be a resolution to the Sino-Tibet conflict through the middle way policy, there is no other way than by talking with the Chinese government for negotiated, mutually beneficial, lasting solution. Until such a time, we'll have to reach out to the international community. And we should also know that the international community, including India, will not leave aside India's national interests and take Tibet's national interests. That is not possible. So our idea would be to see how can we align our interests with that nation's interests. If that can be aligned, then there could be some traction. Since I came into this office, I was in the parliament for 20 years and speaker for 7.5 years. And after 5 years now, break, I came into this office. When we came into the office, we started changing our strategy a little bit by focusing or seeking recognition for the polarities. So one polarity is the present status of occupied Tibet under the repressive Chinese government, and the other polarity is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. So we started working with the US Congress from April 2022. Then there was change in the House, few months later, and then we started working again from beginning of 2023, and we have reached a stage where the President Joe Biden had signed the Resolve Tibet Act, which talks about 4 major issues, all going against China's stated positions. China keeps saying there is no Tibet issue or Tibet problem, and this act, the Resolve Tibet Act, says that Tibet is yet an unresolved conflict, and it should be resolved under international law. And the second point it talks about is the Tibetan people's right to self-determination, which was also enshrined in the 1961 General Assembly UN resolution when we approached the UN in 59, 61, and 65. Then the third angle was not accepting China's narrative that Tibet was part of China since antiquity or ancient times. His Holiness also not accepted that. His Holiness has always, because this used to be one of China's preconditions, that His Holiness should say that China was part of Tibet was part of China, and His Holiness always has very wise answers to all these tricky questions. His Holiness says, "I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians." So what we are looking through the middle way policy is a mutually beneficial solution, both for the Chinese people and the Tibetan people, and that could have cascading effect on the whole region in in South Asia, even China's relation with Pakistan, what they call as all-weather friendship, higher than sky, deeper than ocean, sweeter than honey, kind of. If there's better relations between India and China, there's no need for China to supply Pakistan with all this nuclear, long-range missiles. But what Pakistani people need is more job, more employment, more economic development, not nuclear missiles to kill other people. So all this dynamism could change. So now the next step for us is, how do we work with other like-minded countries? Because we can reach out only to free world. We cannot reach out to authoritarian regions, even developing countries, because they are too much in debt with China creating all this debt, not just in Asian continent, where from South China Sea you have Malacca Straits, you have now Cambodia not being able to pay back loans to Chinese government, and they've taken part of the Sihanoukville port. Coco Islands have already been taken by China. That also monitors the whole Bay of Bengal in the area, which is a huge security threat to India. Now they've taken over Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. So with all these trajectories, now they're mapping all this undersea. So they know where the pipelines are, where the internet lines are, warning signals. So it's a huge security threat. Now with President Muji coming here, hope Muji will learn his lessons. Closing up to China will be detrimental for Maldives, even though India may be acting like a big brother, but that also to some extent should be acceptable. Hopefully Muji's visits this time would be useful in connecting India and Maldives together. By the way, China sent Tibet's glacier water to Maldives as a diplomatic tool to provide drinking water for Maldivians. And China and Pakistan's relation with China, and the Pakistan Economic Corridor also coming up, connecting Gwadar with China, and then Gwadar with whole of Arabian Sea. China's relation with Iran, Saudi, building back those diplomatic relations. Its control on Djibouti, where they might be even be in a position to place war machineries if there is a conflict in the region in Djibouti. And one of our friends from England, a member of parliament, was not allowed to enter Djibouti because of China's pressure. And that's in African countries, where African countries are really having problem reworking on repayment of the loans, and those loans are also being restructured. So I keep saying, when China is pivoting towards the global south, we also have to understand how much purchasing power does the global south have. It's not much. Because purchasing power is all with Europe and free countries, right? So if China floods all these countries with all their overcapacity, not just electric vehicles, then it's going to kill all the small-scale industries and medium-scale industries. And we should be speaking about this now to these countries before they realize that it's too late. So there are a lot of implications on China's behavior and geopolitical, geostrategic issues globally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My question is that, so you're in McLeodganj, that is where the government is, and it's in Himachal Pradesh. Sir. The question that occurs to me is, why not Delhi? The reason why I'm saying that is, if the central Tibetan administration moves lock, stock and barrel from McLeodganj to Delhi, the entire diplomatic core of the world is here.
Yes.
It becomes very easy for you as the head of, the political dispensation, so to say. Tomorrow you could just go and meet the American ambassador, or maybe some visiting Secretary of State could come and meet you, have a cup of coffee with you and discuss. Doesn't it make more sense for you to be somewhere in Malcha Marg or Chanakyapuri, sir? A building, Tibetan government in exile, whatever you want to call it, whatever is the correct nomenclature, sir. I don't know, I'm not aware. That, and a smart bunch of young Tibetans to support you, who go everywhere. And I'm thinking aloud. These have been my thoughts for so many years, for so many decades. I personally feel very strongly about this. Maybe an office building in Washington DC, in London, in 4 or 5 other things, where the Tibetan cause out of a proper structure. And this has nothing to do with McLeodganj. I mean, lovely place. But when you talk about geopolitics, and you've been talking about geopolitics for the past half an hour.
Yes.
Geopolitics in India will happen out of New Delhi. There is no other way to do it and no other place to do it. What do you feel about this?
The distance at one time used to be a constraint, because when we came first also, His Holiness landed on Indian soil on March 31st, 1959. Then he went to Tezpur and to Mussoorie, and he stayed there for almost 1 year. And that was the place designated by the Indian government for us to go. And 1 year after that, the Indian government asked us to go to Dharamsala. So it is calculation from the Indian government side. Even this office, when we first started, it was not easy. The name boards were removed, and then we had to put it back, and all those things. So eventually, it got the name Bureau of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in consultation with the government of India. So for every step that we have to take, of course, we have to seek consent and agreement on whatever move we make. But right now, I would say distance from Dharamsala to here, now there is plane, you can reach in 1 hour. It's not a major issue. I can meet the American ambassador, we met last time also. So it's not a major, our office here, our office in Washington DC, we also have office in Washington DC, we also have an office in London. In fact, Tibetans are the only political refugees who have organized themselves into a fully democratic, functional polity. No other community has that. Uyghurs have elections, but they are not answerable to parliament. We have our Supreme Justice Commission, we have a parliament in exile. So I'm responsible for the management of these institutions. So we have to spend almost 6 months to manage the institutions, and then spend 6 months to deal with the Tibetan community in diaspora spread across more than 25 different countries, 37 locations in India, 10 different states, 2 Indian territories, two union territories, Nepal, Bhutan, everywhere. So it is a challenge, but we have over the last 65 years built institutions. Now we are into e-governance. We have civil servants. We have more than 600 civil servants. We have 13 offices around the world, which functions like our diplomatic missions. Of course, we have a lot of constraints, both human and financial resources. But despite that, of course, the persona of His Holiness the Dalai Lama had kept the Tibetan issue alive for so long, and it's directly linked to His Holiness persona. So in that sense, we have been a very, very successful community. We are not lacking behind in advocacy or reaching out to countries, because now I've traveled to more than 25 different countries over the last 3 years. I have to travel more. Tomorrow night, I'm going to Europe to visit some more countries. So all these things happen. It's not just the distance. I think now the main issue is the strategy. How do you go about reaching out to countries? I keep saying we should know exactly which button to press for which light. We just can't be groping in the dark and work so hard and then feel that there's no result. Then you end up having fatigue.
So I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. What I meant to ask was, when I said that a presence in Washington or presence in London, you said that you're already present there. I was talking about scale, sir.
Yes.
Scale, not a proper quote-unquote embassy building, sir. Proper. With a proper ambassador, with a proper... things at a certain level, at a certain scale, like maybe the UK High Commission in India or the Indian High... Something of that level, because clearly I think more push needs to be there diplomatically, at least, sir.
That's also there. But then there also needs to be political restructuring about their policies on Tibet. For example, UK coined this term suzerainty. You just talk about sovereignty in name, not real sovereignty. So they changed their policy in 2008. So now we have to work towards getting that reversed first, and then get them on board to support to something similar to what US has done on the Resolve Tibet Act. So there's a lot of work to do. We have a lot more work to do. It's not easy. We have to cross a lot more boundaries to be able to put pressure on the Chinese government so that they come on the negotiating table.
My last question to you is, what can India do better to help the Tibetan cause?
Now, one thing that everybody has been saying is to strengthen the central Tibetan administration. Now, we managed to survive for the last 65 years, mainly because of the help from the Indian government and also leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, His Holiness is 89. He's going to be 90 very soon. So he doesn't move as much as he used to. So now the responsibility rests on the Tibetan leadership. We are common people, ordinary people. So there needs to be support to strengthen the existence of CTA. You were suggesting about expanding the structure. Even expanding structures need a lot of financial support.
Yes, sir.
You pay for people, infrastructure and all that. So that could be one area if India is not willing to directly intervene in finding a resolution, which may not be on the cards right now, but in future there could be opportunities. But presently, to keep the central Tibetan administration active, vibrant, there needs to be support, not only from the government of India, but also other governments who are interested in that. So this is one, but political support will largely depend on how China's behavior is. So India has, I'm at least personally happy that India has taken a more stronger position, because China respects only strength, not weakness. That much we know. With present position of the Chinese, of the Indian government, whether it's the Prime Minister speaking or the Defense Minister speaking or the MEA Minister Jaishankar speaking, I think it's very clear that it's not restricted only to disengagement, but for permanent peace on the border.
Absolutely.
So that should be the ultimate, because China keeps salami slicing. They come in 20 kilometers, you push them back by 10, and they're already in 10 kilometers, which they're very good in doing. So now we cannot take all that. Indian government cannot take all that. So the India's position has now become much more stronger, and I keep telling the Europeans, the more you kowtow to the Chinese, the more they will ride you. You're on your two legs. You kowtow more and more, your hands will also be on the ground, and you'll become like a donkey, and the Chinese will keep riding you. Then I also tell our friends in Europe, some of the friends tell me, oh, the dragon is biting at us, meaning China. Then I tell them, who fed the dragon to become so strong to be able to bite at you? It's United States government. You don't have to read too many books. Just read one book, Kissinger on China, and you will know whenever China was able to fall, United States came to support it. And then the European investment. Even now you look at German position, look at the Spanish position when Prime Minister of Spain visited China, and now he took a U-turn on the voting on EV tariffs. So I tell them, see, you know that the dragon is biting at you now. You know who fed the dragon to become so strong. Now, knowing that the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, I think that lesson also applies for India. If you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it?
Yes.
It's not Chinese fault.
It's not Chinese
It's
fault.
our fault that we are giving business and they are attacking us.
Absolutely,
All
sir.
fronts.
Thank you very much, sir, for talking to us. It was absolutely a pleasure.
Thank
and
you.
I have spoken my heart out, and so have you.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, with Sikyong Penpa Tsering. He heads the political establishment, so to say. And a lot of things were spoken, especially about China, history of Tibet, what India should be doing, what Europe should be doing. Henry Kissinger came out briefly for 5 or 10 seconds, and of course, what the United States of America is doing. In a sense, the more you feed the dragon, the more the dragon will bite you. The only answer to this dragon question is stop feeding the dragon and take firm positions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
It was indeed
Thank
an
you.
honor and a privilege, sir. Thank you.
Pleasure. Pleasure.